Okay, well, I'm here to talk with Tim Etchells about the performance To Move in Time, which I saw last week at the Nuffield Theatre in Lancaster. So maybe just start off with the first obvious question is, what sort of made you think about this piece and to work with Tyrone, and why now, I suppose?
Yeah, I mean, this piece goes, in a sense, alongside, it's like a parallel track to the main thrust of my work with forced entertainment, I suppose. In that over the years there's been a number of projects that try to look at text and at particularly monologue as this sort of slightly delirious stream of consciousness tangle. I suppose having, in forced entertainment used text a lot for this very pithy, boiled down, economical kind of picture making machinery, if you like. So shows that really use short sentences, very clear visual images, and almost trying to use the power of language to summon pictures. The interest in those sort of parallel projects, if you like, is in another property of language, which is this property of language as a sort of some kind of reflection of thought processes, or something to do with the kind of delirium that there is in language itself. So over the years, from time to time, has come along one of these thoughts, for me to think, well, to push into that kind of territory, and this is, the most recent of those. And Tyrone is somebody that I've known for a long time, but he read another text of mine in some process a couple of years ago. I did a little research thing at the National Theatre in the studio, and connecting with him again there, I sort of thought, it would be really interesting to write something for him, because he has a very particular sort of presence and quality, and I just thought it would be interesting to try and write a text that spoke into that situation of how Tyrone is.
Could you expand a bit more on that idea of presence, his particular presence, what drew you to him in particular? Well,
Tyrone's interesting because he's somebody who's worked a lot in experimental or slightly off scene kinds of projects, but he's also done a lot of much more straightforward acting. So he's somebody who crosses between worlds, and that's very interesting. And he has a technical understanding of what he's doing. That means that taking on a text like this, which is very convoluted and repetitive and slightly delirious, he has some skills to bring to bear on that. And then he has an energy as a performer. He's very charismatic. He's very... there's a sort of optimism and an affableness to his presence a lot of the time, and a thoughtfulness that I think... What I liked when we did this little thing at the National Theatre, he was reading another text of mine, and he had some fairly ridiculous sort of long flights of fancy in that text, and he managed to sort of occupy those with a sort of thoughtfulness and a gravitas that didn't totally throw them under the bus, but they still were evidently ridiculous. There's somehow balance in between an absurdity and a rootedness, like as a presence. So that was what was interesting to me, to bring that to this text, which is all about, well, ostensibly it's all about time travel. So it is again this idea of a person who embarks on more or less a kind of public thought experiment about if I could travel in time, what would I do? He does occupy it in this way that's sort of, both aware of its ridiculousness, but also able to step into it in a way that takes you inside it as a set of thoughts.
I think that's really true. I mean, I was quite moved by his performance, actually. I mean, one of the things that might be also in the room with us when we watch that piece is an idea of the duration and time of the performance itself, not just the time travel that he's talking about, or the possible versions of what he might do if he had that power, as it were. But there's a kind of sense that he, as a performer, has to go through almost an act of endurance to get to the end. And through that activity, something changes with his relationship to the text.
Yeah, I mean,
Is that sort of part of the kind of the dynamic and the gauntlet you're throwing down to him, as it were, like almost deal with this?
Yeah, I mean, it sort of operates on two levels, in fact, in the sense that the text begins as this very playful and increasingly ridiculous sort of set of, if I could travel in time, I'd make sure that nobody I knew ever lost their wallet or got killed in a car crash, and then I'd make sure I'd make the world a better place by making sure Hitler was never born, and make sure the slave ships never sailed, and sort of going through history and fixing all the rights and wrongs, and then going on to things like, I'd just get rich, I'd use it to find out about the future and
win the lottery,
and all of that kind of stuff. It's the sort of, in a way, it's the cliches and the tropes of time travel, all thrown in there, kind of thing. But what's interesting is that as it goes on, he becomes more and more aware of the limits to that power, and more, I suppose, aware that maybe time would thwart his attempts to change things. Or maybe in the very end of the piece he starts to talk about how if he could travel in time, maybe he would choose not to, for all the reasons that go with the sort of complexity of the territory. So there is a sort of, within the text, there's a very ridiculous, theatrical, playful throwing out of all these ideas, and then there's a sort of focusing down to a more intimate and considered position. And that's paralleled, as you're saying, in a sort of performative shift, in that, I guess whenever you start a performance, you're slightly up and high on the energy of, okay, here we go, kind of thing. There's an audience, here I am, what's this going to be like? And yes, slowly over the course of an hour, there is a sort of dwindling, and there's I suppose, the relation to the audience becomes, in one way, it becomes more and more of a known quantity, in the sense that when you first step onto a stage or into a performance, you literally don't know how this is going to play.
You don't know the rules.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, or the atmosphere of the push and pull is not clear. Whereas after 45 minutes of a 60-minute performance, it's the frames are there. It's established. So there is a sort of dwindling there as well, and a coming into real time and a real kind of contact with the audience. And that's probably one of the things that the performance, one of the main things the performance is about, actually, is, I think it throws up a lot of sand or fog into the air about time travel, but one of the things it's really interested in is, what would it be like if you were really here? And what would it really be like to pay attention to your life in a way that was aware of detail, and also aware of the possibilities and impossibilities of changing things. So it's a sort of, it points at a lot of really extraordinary possibilities in order that in the end you come back to a set of rather ordinary possibilities, and I think realise how extraordinary they are, and how valuable they are. So that is a movement, definitely, in the piece on a number of levels.
And did you, I mean, I think that worked, I mean, I really, really enjoyed the piece. And perhaps that's what I found really moving about it, was what you're saying, that one of the things about time travel is that it gives you an agency where you're avoiding the here and now, in a sense, because you're always trying to alter the here and now. So it's the last thing you think about, although it's the thing that you claim is driving it. It's kind of insane in that sense. And there was a kind of insanity to his speculation about all the possibilities, and in the end he's dragged back to kind of having to deal with the thing that he is in this space and time with us. But there was a kind of sadness to that as well, wasn't there, at the end? Almost a painful openness just to the here and now without talking about any possibility. But maybe that, I mean, I couldn't help, but maybe I'm just being intellectual about it, so I couldn't help but equate that at the end with some notion of death, that the absolute here and nowness of the end of all possibilities, or imagining can only be the end of everything. I mean, because we have to keep thinking, and thinking is always about something that's happening in the future, in one sense. Even if we think about the past, we're actually really still dealing with the future. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, there is a sense of a balloon emptying, I suppose, like that this very playful, fantastical time travel riff that he goes on comes slowly down, that's for sure. But I mean, and yeah, there is also, you know, a few of the last things that he thinks about are he talks about going forwards to see the end of the world, and he talks about going forwards to see his own death, just to see what that will be. He wants to know what it will be like, or exactly how it will happen. There is that, but I think the other thing is that it's you know, one of the things that's sort of underlying it as a text, I think, and as a performance, is the question of basically what kind of possibility do you have to change things, and what kind of agency and ability might you have to make the world a better place. I mean, on any number of kinds of levels. And at a certain point in it, he thinks, well, maybe the time travel wouldn't be the right thing, and he starts thinking, well, what if I was invisible, or what if I could summon help from animals, or make myself into a fog, or an electrical force that could pass from one place to another. And in a way, one of the things there is that, you know, you start to think, well, this is you know, it's an older man, an older black man standing in front of you. He's not a teenager. It's not like a geeky kid sitting in front of the computer. It's an adult.
He's not a natural superhero.
No, it's nor maybe also to look at Tyrone when he walks on, you wouldn't necessarily think that was what will be going through his head. But you are nonetheless. So you read all of this speculation, I think, about change and the possibility of change, and a sense that the world needs changing. Through the person who's there, through the body of the person who's there, through Tyrone as a performer. So I think a lot of different things come into play, and I think there's a politics to this grasping for ways that might be able to affect the world and affect change, in a sense that, however minimally it's, you know, articulated on an explicit level, I think it's really a sense of somebody who's there's a great dissatisfaction somehow. There's the fantasy to change everything. And there's a point in that long list of, other possible superpowers or whatever that he maybe should have been thinking about instead, where he talks about summoning help from animals and machines, and then he says, if I could summon help from other people, and you kind of think, that's almost like a joke in the context of the performance, because there's an audience sitting there. Yeah. But it's also like, what is that to, as a person, wonder about your capacity to summon help from other human beings? I mean, I think that's quite heavy in a certain way, in terms of the question of politics and what we are as a society, what agency and ability to organise and effect meaningful change. What do we have? So I mean, hidden in the sort of fancifulness of it, not very far underneath the surface, I think there's a lot of other kinds of questions there.
I mean, I thought that one of the really interesting things about it was its scenographic form, that the circle of cards, and he steps into this sort of place which then marks him, and he doesn't ever move out, does he? He throws cards from the circle, but he doesn't ever leave it. And there was a kind of inhibiting, I think that what you're just saying about the audience is really interesting, because in a sense, he sort of acknowledges that we're there, but it's almost like Beckett-like, in a sense. We're there but not there. It's almost like he's in his own mind, unfurling this language. And I thought, I think it's beautifully written, this piece, and it's got a really intricate structure and a sort of poetic sense, and it does feel a bit like an internal monologue in that sense. So I was always wondering he's letting me in because he's looking at me, so he acknowledges that I'm there, but I never felt like I was being put on the spot with the material. I am intellectually and emotionally, definitely, but I never thought he was going to leave the circle.
No, I think there is a privacy to it. That you're definitely witnessing somebody. I mean, I was, in one sense, used to think about it as, like you're on a bus journey or a train journey. You've got your head leaned against the window, and you just start. You're walking and you're thinking, and ideas sort of flow into one another, or go this way and then that way and this way and then that way. It's a sort of very interior process, I suppose. I think that's true. But there are these moments in it where Tyrone finds ways to make a kind of contact with audience and with the now of the performance situation. And I think that's, probably, that's a thing that theatre does a lot, isn't it? Is even if you're in a super fictional situation and narrative drama, probably one of the things you're looking for is those moments where the time of the sort of fictional world can sort of connect to or make a link to the time of the audience and the theatre. There's some sort of like melding or momentary parallel tracking that sort of emerges in those moments. And that's, it's probably true in the middle of a Chekhov or a Shakespeare, as it is in any experimental theatre production where you switch all the lights on and start talking to the audience. The desire is, and it's there in this piece, that at certain moments, I guess, he seems closer to you and that gap feels bridgeable, and at other times he feels like he's just off in his own head talking. And
that's also to do with time, isn't it? I think you said it very earlier, that the time but you're with the material as well as the audience. I mean, he's doing time, isn't he? Because he's having to remember and have an engagement with the already written text, and we're doing a different kind of time, but it's connecting absolutely with him.
Yeah.
I mean, and of course the circle's a bit like a clock. Can't help but feel there's a kind of clock face on the floor.
Yes, yeah.
But it's not going in a linear way. It's ebbing and flowing, as you say. It's got a different. I suppose, you know, like I think about a lot of your work, where duration and temporality seems to be a dynamic that's definitely in the room. Was there ever a sense that you could push this into a much longer piece? Not that it felt that it was short, but you know, could it be one of those pieces that could go for 2 or 3 hours? Not necessarily with Tyrone, maybe, but you know.
I mean, I think that in one sense, clearly the speculation on this topic, what would I do if I could travel in time? I mean, you can go on forever with that.
And there's a sense of that foreverness at the end, isn't it?
Yeah.
He repeats the one. Is it one moment? One?
Yeah. I think he does that, and I think it's more or less inexhaustible sort of frame that he sets up. But I think with this piece, maybe this is true of a number of pieces lately for me and for the company, there is this desire to make work that's relatively sort of contained in time terms, an hour and a half, whatever, but where you do this sort of strange magic of by really limiting the material and the means of theatrical expression, in this case a monologue, but in the case of something like Real Magic, it's a single scene that plays and plays and plays in lots of variations. But the desire is to sort of work a kind of weird magic with time in a concentrated, you know, duration, but within that opening up this sort of sense of delirium and a sort of bending of temporality.
It's an obvious question in a sense, but maybe it's one to begin to conclude with. How important was it that Tyrone is a black man in this piece? And there are sort of traces of race and history of certain, you know, particular moments that are very important to our understanding of race. But it also felt like it wasn't the most important thing in the room as well. Both it was and it wasn't, you know. Yeah. And I was wondering, was that a tension that you were consciously working with?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think in one sense, any text, when you put it with a performer, that performer, you know, all the factors of age and race and gender and so on, bring a kind of dynamic force into play with the text. And in one sense, you could say you don't have to do anything more than that, because those things just trigger and evoke and wrap around the text in different ways. And this was slightly different because I knew I was writing for Tyrone, and that was the decision, I suppose, not to think, oh, I can work with a geeky 15-year-old boy or something to do this text. There was something a little bit contrarian, say the person who's going to be locked into this time travel fantasy is this guy, you know, older and so on. But I think it does become very important in how you experience the piece and how Tyrone negotiates it. It's not the only thing that's on the agenda, but I think certain aspects of it, for me, I do think about them in terms of his age and in terms of race. You know, those things do
have a resonance, don't they?
As material. But again, it's also true that if you would give that text, like any other, if you give it to somebody else, then different things come into focus.
Do you see this piece as one of a potential future set of smaller pieces that will make a kind of body of work for Force Entertainment, or is this a kind of one-off?
I mean, there are a number of these works of mine with the company or adjacent to the company where monologue, textual material that's in some sort of very particular narrow focus. There's been a number of them, and I imagine there will be more. It's almost, I suppose, working with the company, there's often a desire to work choreographically and with a lot of social energy and all of those things. And monologue is just this way of sort of saying, well, what if you only had this, this very limited theatrical possibility? What would performance be then? What would theatre be then? So it's an invitation to sort of explore a different area, and you can imagine that it'd be nice to do more along that line.
Well, I loved it. I thought it was a really great piece, and I hope audiences will get a chance to see it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right.